All right, let's talk about how to set up to get ready to do our watercolor. So first, you're going to notice that in your table bins, there are two different cups. We have them labeled with your table numbers and then clean and dirty. The reason that we do this is it keeps too many people from piling up at the sink at the end of the class period, and also then you can use it to change your water and get nice clean water anytime you need without having to get up. So all you have to do is to pour in your personal water cup. You'll notice they're very little from the clean water, and then whenever you want to change it out, you just dump it in the dirty water and pour yourself some new clean water. So let's start with this and get ourselves some clean water. So we're ready to go with that. Next, we have our paint palette ready and set up. Like you saw in the slideshow, we're going to keep our paint palette so that the paint cakes are facing away from us and the paint palette itself is facing towards us. I'm right-handed, so I have it set up so that the water is right here on my right side, my brushes are on my right side, my paint palette is up above, and then my paper towel, I already have it torn off, is over here on the left. Whenever you're getting ready to paint, we have to start by waking up our paint. So these guys are dry. I can put my fingers inside of them and turn them over and they're completely dry. There's nothing in there. So depending on where you are in the classes for the day, like third hour, you're always going to have to wake up the paint. Fourth hour, you might not need to wake up the paint because third hour will have already done it and left the paint cakes open for you, so you may not actually need to do this most days unless you use a color that the person who's sitting there didn't use. And then sixth hour with you guys, sometimes it'll be dry and sometimes it won't. But everybody needs to know how to do this so that they can get it taken care of. So in order to wake up your paint, one, you should only activate the paint that you're going to use for the day, right? Because otherwise it's just messy and silly to have it all working out. So what you do to activate it is you're going to use a large brush, so the 7, 8, or 9, and dip it in the water. And I'm just making sure that my bristles get saturated. And today I'm going to use blue, green, brown, and red. So I'm going to start with the red, and I just take my brush over and drip it in. Okay, let's see if I can get a little closer on that. So I've got water, drip, so like 2 little drips work nice. So dripped into the red, I'm going to drip into the green, blue, all right, you can see them just kind of going in there, and then brown. So that's it. That's how you activate the paint. It should be ready when you're ready to use it to paint, but it has to be activated. Now, next, we are not ever going to paint directly out of the paint wells. We always, always, always take the paint, move the paint over to your paint palette before you begin. For this practice, we're going to start with using a lot of blue, and we need to have the blue ready to go, and we need to have the brown ready to go right away. The other ones we can bring over a little bit later. If you bring them all over at the beginning, then sometimes they're dry by the time you're ready to use them. So we're just going to leave these guys up here. And I'm using my large brush, and I just lay it into the paint and absorb the paint on the brush like that. And then I can bring it over just like this. Okay, so we need the paint that we're going to use today to be kind of bright. The blue should be kind of bright, and then we'll water it down with water as we paint it. Okay, so I've got my blue all moved over. Now, before I move over my brown, I need to come over to my water and rinse off my brush. It's okay to use blue water on the brown because it won't do anything to the brown. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did and just move it down. Just like that, and put a little bit more paint water in. Okay, cool. So now I'm ready with my blue and my brown to start what we need to do today. Okay, so let's zoom back up. All right, and I'll set the water over to the side. Now we have this sheet that we prepared already for the watercolor techniques, and we're going to start with some crayon, and you'll notice in your bins You have crayons for everybody, and it doesn't matter if it's particularly pointy, but we're going to do a couple of things with our crayons in these two sections. So let's zoom in real quick. So for the crayon resist, right here, you're going to draw a simple shape with your crayon. And you need to push kind of hard so that it will work, and you need to not fill it in. So I'm going to draw a big heart shape right here with the crayon. I know it's hard to see because it's white, but that's kind of the point of the crayon resist. Okay, so we've got that one, and then up here, I'm going to make a cloud shape up at the top. Now with my cloud shape, I am going to push a little bit harder, and I am going to fill it in. Let me show you on the back of this little piece of paper what I'm going to do with a pencil so that you can do it with your crayon and know what to do. So I'm going to make a little cloud shape like this, and then I'm going to fill it in with my white crayon in like this so that it gets kind of puffy. If you don't do it exactly right, it's going to still probably look like a cloud as long as you make a little cloud shape up here. So I'm going to go round, round, lump, 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 and then try to make sure I'm in the right area and filling it in. Okay, so that's for the crayon resist. Now we're all ready to do that. Okay, so this little picture down here, we're going to start with doing the sky in this little picture, because this one we have to do a little bit at a time. And we have to do him a little bit at a time because we need to make sure that the top is dry before we do the bottom. So I'm going to start with him. I'm going to use my little brush. I have my paper towel in my left hand because it's my eraser. And I'm going to dip my water in the brush, wipe it off on the side. Let me zoom out a little bit. So you dip it in and then you wipe it off just like this. We don't flick like that because that flicks water everywhere. So you just kind of do that. And then I'm going to dip the water or the paintbrush into my paint and wipe it off. So you want your brush to be full of paint but not to be dripping. And then I'm going to come over, notice how I'm holding the handle and not the ferrule, and I'm going to paint in the sky. And it will show you, when I'm just gentle and careful, how the crayon resist kind of works. So I'm painting in the blue in the sky. Before the blue dries, if you need more paint, you need to get it on your brush. Okay, if the blue dries, you'll end up with a line. And so now here's kind of a tricky part. I'm going to try to leave the area where my tree is going to be a little bit lighter. So to get it to be a little bit lighter, I'm going to just get water. And I'm going to paint in around this like little tree shape just with water. And now I've lost my cloud a little bit, so I'm going to go into it and absorb it out, and then I can get my cloud back. Right, so see how I did that with the paper towel? I just right on top of it, and then my cloud shape came back. So I'm going to come in here again with a little bit of just water, because I do want it to look blue kind of behind the tree, but not a lot, right? Because we'll do the sponge technique to do the poofy part of the tree, the leaves and stuff. So we have a plan for it, but I want to make sure that it doesn't look too blue behind there. Okay, so that's what that should look like. And then you just give it a chance to dry. Okay. Right. Next, because we just did that so that it would have a time to dry, next we're going to do the salt technique and the alcohol technique. All right, so let's go up here to the salt area. Now, with the salt, we have two different kinds. We have table salt, which is just regular. Don't eat it. It's been used a lot and is pretty friggin' dirty. And then rock salt, which is these big kind of salt crystals. And each one of these will make a different sort of look in our watercolor paint. So for this section, you need the paint to be really bright and intense in order to work with the salt. It also needs to be pretty drippy and fluid. So I'm going to make sure that this blue is very bright by getting some extra blue and putting it in there. Okay, you need to look at your blue and see if you need your blue to be brighter. You have to look and see. So it might not need to be brighter, it might be perfect. Now I'm using my large brush and I'm going to generously apply watercolor. It should not be all, it should be puddly, and you should not see any brush strokes because it should be puddling up all over the place. I'm getting about halfway across. And now I'm going to put a little more of this blue in there, right? Because remember, we want it puddly. I'm going to rinse off my brush and get some brown over here. And I'm doing the same thing. We want them to kind of bleed together, right? And just nice and puddly. Generous amount of paint. It shouldn't run all over your paper, but watercolor will just stay where it's wet. It just stays where it's wet unless you put a lot on your paper. It just remains where it's wet. So if you get the paper wet ahead of time, then the watercolor will dribble all over into whatever the wet area is. All right, so now we have the blue and the brown set up, and I'm going to take a little pinch of the table salt, and you have to do this fast. You can't let it sit for a long time and then do it, or it won't work. So table salt all along the kind of top part. And then I'm going to take some of the rock salt and put the crystals in to the puddliest bit. Whoop, that's off the thing. The puddliest bit of the paint. Okay, so rock salt won't work at all if it's just like these guys that are on the drier parts of the paint. It won't do anything. But it'll start to do stuff if you put it in a very puddly section. Okay? So that's it for the salt. Now I'm going to turn this to do the crayon resist and the alcohol, just so that you can see it with the camera. So with this one, you can choose to either use the blue or the brown. I'm going to use the blue for it. And you need to have, on your table, everybody should have a little cup of alcohol with some Q-tips. Probably the Q-tips are already inside it. And what we're going to do this crayon resist is just go ahead and with that large brush again, I'm trying to stay out of this blue, the area right above it, right? You're going to just paint a generous amount of a color on here. So you should see, hopefully, oh, that was not what I was supposed to do, whoops. You should see that your crayon resist should work. If you've pushed hard enough, you should be able to see it showing up in the heart or star, whatever you did. I'm painting back over this. Mine's not showing up as well, but I'll be able to show you some examples in class of ones that worked a little bit better. I don't know why mine didn't work so great today. Perhaps I didn't push hard enough. All right, homies. Next, we're going to try with the crayon resist, or not with the crayon resist, with the alcohol. So just dip your little Q-tippy in the alcohol, and you can see already how it's working. Okay, and it just ends up making some patterns, some different kind of textures and designs. All right, next. I'm kind of struggling here because of needing the camera to be able to see stuff. So you're going to have to just forgive me for having my paint on the wrong side, and hopefully I don't make a dribbly mess because I can't get it to I can't get it to work. All right, next we're going to paint in our tree trunk because this shouldn't be too wet for that. It should be dry. And we'll go ahead and use the brown while we already have it out and activated. So I'm using the little brush and I'm getting it wet. But with this, because this is a fine area, I want to make sure that I am wiping the brush off like this so that it gets kind of pointy. So what I'm going to do right now is just use this brown paint to paint in the tree trunk. So we paint down and lift up, paint down and lift up. Areas that puddle can be resolved by dipping your brush in them again and moving them around like this. Okay, and just gently, kind of barely touching. When you're trying to get into a little area, you just kind of barely touch it. So we're using that pressure, different pressure again, just like we do in drawing. Okay, now I have my tree trunk painted in. I'm going to turn my paintbrush over and use the end of it to incise some lines, and that means that you're just pushing into the paper and just using, kind of damaging the paper to create a texture. This can work really well for anything that needs to have kind of any sort of little stripy texture, so it can look cool on butterflies and those lines on flowers. It definitely works pretty well for tree trunks. So that's incising, and we've got that situation squared away. We have to wait for the tree to dry in order to move on to the grass and the leaves. But what I can show you while we're waiting for it to dry is some fine line practice. So sort of we already started to work on that when we were working on the tree trunk. But with your fine lines, when you're doing fine lines, you have to make sure that you get your paintbrush in the paint, and then you wipe it on the side so that it's nice and pointy. Okay, it can't have too much paint in it or the line will spread, and you need to make sure that you are not pushing very hard at all with your paintbrush when we need a fine line. So let me get a good angle so you can see this. So you're going to do this right along with me. So first, just paint a regular line, right, just like that. So hopefully you got something like this, and it's pretty skinny, but is not necessarily a fine line. Now I'm going to load my brush again with paint, wipe it on the side, and then I'm going to tilt it straight up and very lightly drag it along like that. And that's how we're going to get our fine lines. So it's all about pencil pressure, or brush pressure. Remember, if you're pushing so hard that it does this, that you're not going to get good control or craftsmanship. But if you're just pushing really lightly and just using the end, then you're going to get good control and have good craftsmanship, and it'll look nice. All right, my tree trunk feels dry enough for me to go ahead and start working with our grass and making our flowers. So I'm going to go back over here and get my big brush, and I'm going to move the green down. I haven't done that yet. And get a little bit of water in there. And same thing, remember, we're going to wipe it on the side to keep it from being too full. And then with this, I'm just going to paint in here. Paint in here, and then just paint around. Now, when you're painting something, you can always take some of the puddly paint to spread it around, and then it doesn't leave puddlies. The key to not getting the outline, like where the paint dries and it leaves that line, the key to avoiding that is making sure that you're painting your next bit of the paint, like right here where I'm going to paint the next bit of the paint, in there when it's still wet. So it's still wet, so it's going to paint right next to it and the little line will disappear. If it's dry, then the little line will not disappear and it'll stay. You can make that line disappear if you just kind of go over it again. I might be able to show you that when we're over here. Okay, so over here, I'm going to paint over it. Do you see how the line stayed? If I paint over it a couple of times gently, it'll go away. So those lines are okay if that's what you're aiming to have. But if you're not trying to, we don't want to see them. Okay, so you might use them for something, but you want to make sure that if you are using them for something, that you are doing it intentionally, so on purpose. There we go. It's pretty great. So we have this. Now this is kind of puddly here, so what I'm going to do to keep it from drying weird is wipe off my brush like that, and then use my dry brush to absorb some of the paint. Okay, and this is going to help with that grass texture too. So if you're puddly, go ahead and absorb some of the paint and clean it up. All right, we're going to have to make a part 2 to this video, so good work everybody. And remember, if it's wet, it gets stored on the drying rack.